in the week. Okay. All right, Doc. Do you go by Dr. James or Jim or?
I do in India because that's what they would say there, but I usually just go by James. Yeah.
Okay, James. Well, I appreciate coming on. I know we met through Podmatch, I think, right? We got connected. And
Yes.
I'm always interested in branding and how to brand yourself and how to brand your product. So I think it's a good conversation. But interestingly enough, you're originally a cultural anthropologist, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So maybe you can tell me a little bit about your background. And I don't know, you don't wake up as a kid and say, I'm going to be a cultural anthropologist. So there's obviously a progression there. And you tell me a little bit about your background, and then we can get into all the branding and stuff that you're doing now for entrepreneurs. It makes sense?
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to be an academic since I was in high school. So I had some burning questions that fascinated me in college, and so that led me to get a PhD in cultural anthropology. I'm actually a South Asia expert, but my focus was on identity and how people project certain identities in public space and conceal other ones.
Interesting. So a lot of it's research. Is when you say academia, you're teaching and you're researching, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a social scientist, I was focused on empirical sort of behavioral research, and mine was a lot more empirical than most of my colleagues.
Got it.
More like a sociologist, which I think listeners are probably they're more familiar with that discipline than what I was trained in. But the interesting thing is that I got a lot of good experience in the field studying human behavior very closely, but also understanding the disconnect between verbal performance, language performances, assertions of my favorite behavior is I assert that I believe something. Well, that's interesting. Do you?
Right. Yeah.
So
right. You don't really.
So or is that behavior designed to convince me of something else, but you don't really actually believe it, but you'd like me to think you anyway. So when you this is how complex things get with human social life. And so that stuff really fascinates me. I always did, in part because I have Asperger's and I don't interact very well for very long periods of time. So I'm really bad with strangers, and I talk too much or not at all.
Yeah, I'm not Asperger's, and I don't think I'm good with strangers either. So it's kind of the same thing.
That has always been a struggle for me. And so I think social science was unconsciously my way of sort of having a professional occupation, at least for a while I was in academia, where I could focus on
be better
issues.
at reading people. And I think that's a common problem. I find people are bad at making decisions, right? They go with their gut because they're reading. I just had a guy on recently. I wrote a book, Never Go With Your Gut. He's a neuroscientist or something.
Yeah.
And we're really bad at making decisions. And that's why we're also bad at like hiring people and, making decisions in our business, because we try to evaluate things and we're usually wrong.
Yeah. So. I mean, I think Malcolm Gladwell talked a little bit about one of the big issues, which is that we live in most of our relationships are essentially with strangers now.
Yeah.
In the 21st century. And that's very new in human history. And for most of human history, we interact with people we know too well.
Yeah. In our village, in our local community.
We know them we know everything about them.
Right.
And that has a massive cognitive and psychological advantage. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you don't have to deal with when you live in that kind of society.
Right. You don't have to be so careful because you trust people and you know their background, and you don't have to try and read them. Right.
You don't have to consciously try to read them. See, when you say read them, you're talking about this conscious process where you're dealing with a stranger. And that's a modern reality that we all suck at, because humans actually aren't really designed to do that without a lot of training.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, you know what John's saying because you're like, well, I know John. I've known him for 20 years. I know what he means. Right. And then you try and apply that to people you don't know, and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
No, in fact, it gets you into real hot water.
A lot of trouble. Yeah.
So, it's certainly with me as well. But I've been trained, when I'm dealing with a stranger, I'm always checking my assumptions, but I'm also really skeptical that I know what they're really saying, Right. And I think that comes out of having to do research where there's something at stake and you understanding the underlying meanings of what people are saying and what they're doing.
Well, you have the cognitive training. You're
right.
You're trained to do this. So you look for those cues and you question things.
Well,
most of us just wander through life.
Right. Exactly. So people are on autopilot, and that's where you get in trouble with random people on the sidewalk. So
that's where the con man came from, the confidence man, right? Exactly.
We have a lot of what we wrestle with as professionals is trying to get better at interacting with strangers. I mean, you're in a business where you're meeting new clients. So am I. So
all the time, right?
You got to build rapport fast, and you have to be able to get better at understanding what they're not telling you that you need to know.
Right. So I can be better valuable to them.
Right. So the segue here, I've talked about this before in another show, the segue here between, and so this is just part of modern life, and it's getting actually more and more complicated, I think.
Yeah, more difficult, right?
More difficult because our society is getting more diverse. And people are throwing themselves in more diverse social milieu than like my parents who are 80 years old. So they just they just cling to New England and don't leave.
Exactly. Well, because they feel comfortable there, because they feel safe. We're in an environment where we don't have to.
I've tried a million times. They have lots of money. I tried a million times to get them to move out of Massachusetts.
No,
just have better weather. No, they know the culture. They know the deal.
Right. No, I think for a lot of people, it's very uncomfortable. Like it's very exhausting to have to try to not trust people and evaluate them all the time. And you get to the point in your life where you're an adult and you're like, well, I don't have to do this anymore because now I understand people.
Right.
And you don't.
So now you know what my life has been like, because I'm exhausted like that socially all the time.
All the time. Yeah, sure.
So that's what it's like having Asperger's. But I think so it led me to social science and really focusing on human behavior and making sure that I didn't jump to assumptions, that I listened.
Yeah.
Things that I have to force myself to do, which led to, I think, some skills that were transferable once I got into the business world. My training is actually in understanding how decoding the symbolism and language of stories people tell, largely in public space, about their culture, about their values, and then how that connects or doesn't connect to their actual behavior, other behavior.
Yeah.
So that's very valuable when you get into branding for any kind of business, because if you're a business person, at the end of the day, you need to get people to buy your product again or your service again.
Right.
And that's the behavior you care about as a business person. The
behavior you're out of business,
You didn't get into the business to obsess with marketing behavior as a business. Right. But unfortunately, if you want to scale, you're going to have to get into that. And that is the world of media, symbolic communications, language. And it's very uncomfortable for a lot of folks who are, for example, lawyers like yourself, who have a specific hardcore professional training and skill set, which is basically analytical like mine.
Yeah, basically. They don't give marketing skills,
Right. So then you have to learn this other behavioral domain, which is what marketing really is. It's just language and symbolism. And so
makes sense. Sure.
The key is to understand that you make sure you don't have a disconnect between, and this is really important, what you're assuming your repeat customers are getting out of you.
Yeah.
What they're really latching onto that makes them a repeat customer. Assuming that you understand that without actually doing your homework.
Well, James, I think that 9 times out of 10, a lot of people are wrong. They don't do the research. They don't talk to the customers. They don't ask the questions. They just assume, oh, I know what my customers need, and I'm going to keep putting that out there. And they're wrong.
Yeah. And often I know with professionals, the real temptation is to use a technocratic marketing pitch or a technical marketing pitch. In other words, I'm a legal geek, so I'm just going to have
show you how smart I am.
Basically, that's what it becomes, is marketing as I'm a smart ass. And that will attract you a tiny niche of people who could be good clients, but they are the people who need you to prove that to them because they don't believe you.
Right.
Now, I would argue that those are the toughest clients. So if you can convert them, that's great.
Yeah.
But you actually, to grow your business, you need a whole bunch of other people who actually they don't approach life like, for example, I do, or maybe you, where you're just skeptical of all the strangers, right?
Right.
So most people aren't actually that low trust.
No, because it's hard to live that way.
You can't survive. I mean, I am
you
because
cross the street thinking a bus is going to hit you every single time.
No, I am because my brain is messed up. But I think most people in today's world aren't actually that low trust because we actually live in a society of strangers where we have to really trust.
Right.
There's a confusion. We actually trust the average person more now than 500 years ago. Because 500 years ago, when you left the village, you pretty much had your hand on your weapon.
Yeah, because you're out in the tundra and they're going to get you.
You did not trust anybody.
Yeah. And people James, do you think that it, because of all this interaction and social media, and we're all connected and everything's on the news and it's wrong half the time, that our awareness, like, given your condition, right? Yeah. And I've learned this through abnormal psych is often just an exaggeration of like some normal things that we go through, right? So everyone, so don't you think, and I could be wrong, you're contradicting me anyway. Isn't our distrust like heightened because of all the crap that's gone on in the world and the lying and or not really?
No, our fear. People are mistaking distrust with fear. So people are a lot more afraid now. We're more afraid of the stranger, and we're more afraid of other random things because the media is feeding us 10,000 things to be afraid of that the medieval villager was not getting those signals.
Yeah, so they weren't even thinking about these things. We're just bombarded.
They had very limited set of fears that are actually primal, right? It's like when I leave the village, I don't know anybody, and we don't have a police force, and we don't have rule of law, and we don't have civic obligation, and
there's wild animals out there.
Some guy could come out of the bush and just mug me.
Right, just kill you.
Right, and there's no cell phone to call the police, so I have to have a weapon because I'm going to have to kill somebody potentially, and that's how people live. That's how men live.
That's why they stayed in their villages, right?
And that's why women never left.
Right. They need them to cook and raise the kids.
Yeah, they don't leave the house because they could get raped, killed. So 5 million years, that's human history. We now have a more open, free-flowing urban life, but we are more afraid.
Makes sense.
But the weird thing is we counteract that by giving people a lot of implicit trust. Like, it's actually kind of crazy how much implicit trust people give. Because you have to, otherwise you would be just you wouldn't be able to do anything.
Yeah, because you'd have no faith in you. But you know what? But then you trust people and they take advantage of you. There's people out there that know that because you trust, and that's generally human nature, they can steal from you or look at all this stuff online, all these these scams and stuff. And the older the person, the more common they fall for it, because they have a different, like you said, they have a different, paradigm of what the world is, because they grew up like your parents did, my parents did, in their village.
So I think part of the problem is we have a lack of statistical perspective too, which is that the younger you are, the more you're involved in social media and other things. You're interacting on a week basis with many more people than like my parents who are 80 years old. They're not even on social media.
No, of course.
So like my social network, quote unquote, I mean, I've got 9,000 followers on LinkedIn. I've got, I've got several hundred on Facebook because I'm not that active on it.
No, me neither.
But the point is,
they're around the world, right?
But those are all super weak ties.
Yeah, they're just connections through.
I barely know any of those people.
Me too.
And I would never will.
No.
So I've still got this tiny circle of the people that I have a high trust reciprocal relationship with, and that really hasn't changed that much. I think that circle's shrunk for a lot of modern people, and it's shrunk and they have more weak ties. So it's a really strange world we live in that should be bewildering to most people because it's not how like my parents, certainly how my grandparents grew up. Right. So I think my point is that the more weak ties you have out there in the universe, Mitch, the more it's statistically more likely that you're going to have more incidences of being conned. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's like you bought more lottery tickets, right?
And I think people learning this, like becoming conscious of it's probably not too good. Like they'll just freak out.
Yeah. So we all have had more experiences of that because we have more weak connections. And we have more, look how many, just sit down someday and count up just the number of like businesses in the last 20 years that you have developed some kind of digital commerce relationship with subscription purchase?
Oh, there are thousands.
Yeah, exactly. So, you and I have both had experiences where the customer service was really bad. It was a disaster. We remember some of them.
Yeah.
Some of those businesses, others we just forget. But the point is, when you get involved in this many relationships, you're going to have more instances, anecdotes,
of course,
where you feel like you were screwed. And that's what leads to this perception that the world is collapsing and everyone's evil. So I'll clear it up for their listeners. It's actually not true at all.
Okay, good.
So I have 9,000 followers on LinkedIn. I post every day for the last 4 years.
You're good. I don't post every day.
I've only blocked 85 people
in that whole time
out of 9,000 for very antisocial behavior.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever blocked.
So that is, I mean, you do the math. That's basically
very small. Yeah,
less than 1%.
Right. Yeah, 9.
So I think I mean, that's my evidence that basically we're pretty well trained to be decent folks in front of strangers.
Yeah, people are generally good, and
so
and
I'm actually
each other.
I feel very good about basic human impulse. I don't have a concern there. I think the problem is that the individual human brain wasn't meant to have this many relationships with anything or anything. We're not wired that. We're wired to live in a family of 30 people who maybe moves from one summer camp to winter camp. I mean, that's the hunter-gatherer world.
Yeah. I mean, I saw some statistic of the amount of data that passes our eyes in a day. Yeah. It's like billions of bits. It's so much. It's too much. And then, by the way, you get countries like Russia that's literally trying to just show that the West is just totally unstable. So they put shit out there all the time that's completely wrong, and it increases your fear.
We have more relationships with other humans, each individual, and they're all weak, and we don't know the people well. But we also have just more signals.
Yeah.
Assaulting our brain. That's because the digital environment increases the amount of signal inflow. So, and neuroscientists can talk to you for the end of time about how the brain handles signal overload. It throws it all in the trash bin.
Yeah, I'm sure.
The problem, and there's an organ that does that called the thalamus. It's a filter. And its evolutionary role is really immediate threat detection.
That makes sense.
So, but what it does do is pass things to the neocortex that need to be thought about consciously if necessary. But most of the signals that you and I are getting, including signals from screens that are on in our living room, that just gets trashed.
Yeah, you don't even see it half the time.
But here's the thing, it actually wears you out.
Yeah, it's exhausting. Well, I guess, James, is it true that people basically are, they work on an old paradigm, right? The village idea, and then they're applying that to what's going on in the world, and it's just not working, right? Because
no, it's not. And I'm working on a book to talk about the fact that we
another book. Good.
This one will be more Malcolm Gladwell-esque, because I think we need to, as a society, we need to have more conscious discussions, and policymakers do. Especially,
I love his books. He's great.
About how to manage the pace of social change,
right?
More proactively, because right now we're just reacting to it.
Yeah, we're just don't know what else to do.
Right. So it creates a lot of business for coaches and leadership.
Yeah, oh my God. The coaching business is like out of control. Everyone's a coach in some respect, right? They're all coaching different parts of your life. They're all experts. I don't know. I have a lot of friends who are coaches, so I say that.
I'm sure you do. The segue to branding here is that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. How did you make that segue, and what happened?
Well, I went into market research, so I didn't go immediately into marketing per se. I was doing behavioral research for companies on all sorts of topics, and those were all big food and beverage companies at the time.
You're basically researching how their consumers.
Well,
behave.
I began my business career doing market research, empirical, one-on-one, in-home, social science research, to try to understand why people were converting their pantries to organic food. Okay. What would cause someone to go from shopping once a month at Whole Foods, and they were the client, to basically filling up a cart every week at Whole Foods.
Right, like what's their motivation?
Yeah. Well, what happens behaviorally? What's their social environment? What are the values they're absorbing from the outside that they didn't have before that then drive the behavior? So it's that interaction between language and symbolism and other kinds of behavior, which the business person cares about, which is boxes and carts to the cash register. So,
right. Well, you're profiling their customer, right? You're profiling their ideal customer pretty much, right?
But we wanted to understand this intersection of language symbolism, because organic is really flagged by a seal on packaging. Like it's pure symbolism.
Right.
I mean, it could be the cross, right? It's the same thing. So what is the relationship between that and the meanings imputed upon it, and then purchase behavior, which is where people start to make money on the basis of that symbol? So that's what we started to do. I started off my career doing, which was a good, I think, segue from academia, because it's kind of a meaty puzzle. So anyways, long story short, what we found out after a couple of years of work at this company that was kind of a startup itself in market research is we found out that the people and the values that were driving mass conversion to heavy organic buying, like half or more at the pantry and half or more of the food, were basically pregnant baby boomer educated moms who are starting to absorb more knowledge about chemical pollution in the food system, food supply, and also especially dairy. So in 1995, the United States dairy industry rapidly rolled out RBGH, recombinant bovine growth hormone, which is a synthetic hormone created in a laboratory.
Right.
And it massively increases milk production per cow.
So they give it to the cows to make them make more milk.
Yes. And
it does other things to the milk too.
And that started spreading. And what happened was that there were some influencers and other folks who basically started to get the word out. Well, wait a minute. This is a hormone that's in my milk?
Yeah, that's in the milk that's going into your children now.
And then now it's going into my baby?
Yeah.
So what happened is educated women at that time were getting more skeptical as a social class about authority, regulators, the food system, because they were more empowered than earlier generations of women and moms. And they weren't just going to take things for granted from the doctor or the pediatrician. It was the baby boomer moms, educated baby boomer moms, were the first cohort to really sort of question authority, essentially, right? Because they had done that. They had done that as college
baby students. Boomers is like what period? Like what period's baby boomers, James? It's like
46 to 65. 1946.
Yeah, and I'm 66, so I'm the tail end, the beginning of the next group.
Right. So it's a small niche that I'm talking about in the late 90s. And they glommed onto, for a variety of media, sort of semi-fueled media reasons too, glommed onto hormones in dairy. And of course, you have, like, milk is one of the first things you give your toddler, right? Once they get cleared by the pediatrician at about 6 months, you start giving them milk. So, and it's like it's a staple beverage.
Right. Kids, well, they think they're changing their opinion.
Right. So this was the entry point, because the fear was inserted symbolically through this ingredient. And it actually took off. It took a life of its own through mom to mom storytelling. And we were picking up the stories in our research because we were just listening. And so the kind of interviewing that I was trained in is called ethnomethodological interviewing. And that it's a style of inductive research where you don't go in with a hypothesis and then just try to prove it and collect the data to prove it, which is how a focus group works.
Yeah.
So if you're like slightly off on your hypothesis, you're just going to produce a giant illusory conclusion of silliness, which is what most focus groups do.
Makes sense, right? I mean, if your belief is wrong.
Yeah. If you're totally off base, your focus group will just lead you right off a cliff.
All over the place.
So if you are basically investigating something you already are an expert in, a focus group is fine. But if it's not, like, what does organic mean to my brand's consumers? And everybody was off base 20 years ago. They have no idea what they're talking about. So this was the best method, because we didn't go in and assume anything, because I couldn't make this story up if I tried. But we kept hearing it from these mothers, whole food shoppers, who are like, all my older friends are telling me that their daughters are developing boobs when they're 8 or 9. It's because of the damn hormones. They just started putting them in dairy. Oh my God. And it just becomes a freak attack from there.
Right. And whether it's true or not, it gains its own.
Yeah. So that's literally the story they're talking about. They're talking about their daughters being messed with, their kids' biology being messed with due to a big corporate, big co-experiment on the human species. And this is a long-standing, actually, genre of anti-authoritarian stories in the natural foods movement. But this happened to be one that went mass.
No, Whole Foods at that time was pretty small company still,
small.
right?
Yeah, very small. And, natural foods was still a cultish sort of weird niche.
Yeah, I had a friend whose mom was into natural foods. You'd have to go to these weird like health food stores and you couldn't like go to, Yeah.
And they would only have like 20 categories. It was never a full service store. So you could only, anyway. So so stories are actually what I'm trained to deconstruct.
Okay.
Right. So what's underneath them that might cause people to go buy something?
Okay. Makes sense.
So that's actually what my expertise is now. And that's what I do with my clients. So in branding, I don't care if it's a service business or a product business, you need to be able to figure out by listening to your fans' stories about when they used your products and services, why they use them, and just shut up and listen. And then do it 8 to 10 times with 8 to 10 different people. It's all you need. And you'll see the patterns. They should jump right at it. Right.
That's it. 8 to 10 is basically the number.
And you want to look, just as a start, because you want to look for the things that you want to look for the patterns behind why people keep buying your product or service that all 8 to 10 people share. So you're going to get some natural variation when you talk to 8 to 10 people.
There's going to be themes.
Right. And you have to filter out the noise and you have to look for the 2 or 3 things that are everybody agrees with, and boom, that's it.
So if I'm a small business owner, I call 10 of my best clients or something like that.
Yeah. And the problem with when you're like you and I with doing this is that like you and I can't be doing those interviews because they could be talking about
They won't be honest.
Well, I don't think we'll actually shut up and listen. And even if we do listen,
the bias that we bring, right?
Yeah. Even if we do listen, it might be kind of weird. Now it's a little easier because you're talking to people who like you.
Right. So there'll be more. Yeah. Well, that's You don't pick people that don't like you. You don't want those answers.
It's not like the consumer complaint line. That's not what's going to happen. So
how about a survey? Would that work? Like an electronic survey? Or
it would. That's a buffer. That's a great way to do a buffer. But you would have to set that up so that they could type things, right, and write a story. I find that most people actually don't know how to write. They suck at it. They got a C- in school. I'm obviously an exception. It's one of my top skills. Most people,
I know most of us are bad writers. I'm good at contracts. I'm bad at writing like articles.
Right. So people are really, so it's actually a really bad thing to do is ask someone to write 2 paragraphs in a survey. So that's why I think you need to get on the phone and take notes. Like you do the work and you listen. Now, my point is if you can find those common denominators of, and the why behind product and service loyalty, which, or repeat purchase, it basically boils down to this thing called an outcome. And, in classical marketers talk about benefits. I like outcome because it's scientific and it keeps us focused on there's something I can go measure and I can see it probably. Right. And so they'll tell you what and there's a couple layers of outcome. One is the immediate outcome. Like I hired a lawyer and, they negotiated well and I won the case. Right. So there's some functional outcome where I felt like I got the benefit of the expertise I thought I had hired. Now they could give you some detail around what that is. Now that's nice. But I can tell you that if you're in B2B professional services, you don't want just that. You really want to get to the emotional outcome. And the emotional outcome is kind of a linguistic sleight of hand. But when humans tag an event with an emotion, like, I don't know, like a wedding.
Literally online, tag an event?
No.
Or just in their mind?
When they in their mind, when they label an event with an emotion and they feel like I felt like this at that on that occasion or at that event.
Yeah.
We're very good at doing that. And that's because that is a reinforcing mechanism behaviorally that humans have developed so that we can label things as sort of extreme positive, extreme negative to know what to do, what to seek out again and what to not. It's what an intelligent animal does. Actually, a lot of animals do it, to be honest with you, without actually thinking about it. But so we label occasions based on how much we want to repeat them and how much we want to avoid them, basically.
Okay, makes sense.
And this is coming out of B.F. Skinner's work, which is, in this case, it's actually really useful because we often think about emotion as something it's like, I don't know, it's a hot air balloon disconnected from reality. It's not. So if I'm sitting at my desk and I suddenly get angry, it didn't just happen. It's not like God hit me or something. It didn't just come out of nowhere. What's happening is that I'm remembering an empirical event that made me angry. That made me angry. Now, I may be so messed up in the head that I can't even get there without a therapist.
Yeah, sure.
That's possible. But that anger is coming from behavior in the real world. We're processing that behavior as an aversive thing, and we call it bad, and we get angry. And sometimes we get all confused and we have to go and get a professional help figure out what's making us angry all the time, right? And it's usually specific interactions, specific repeated interactions. So anyways, so the idea is that you can get to the emotional outcome, or the social outcome is actually a better way to say it. So if I hire a lawyer and they're going to produce, basically going to fill out some forms, or they may go to court and do a verbal argument. Those are the two behaviors I'm buying.
Right.
I want to win. This guy has a better track record, or so he claims. Oh yes, I hired him. He keeps winning for me. This is awesome. But you know what? Here's what it's like to work with him. Like when I win my case, what do I get in my life? Right. So think about the social or emotional outcome of you succeeding in delivering your service or delivering a good product to somebody. And that's actually
how it makes the client feel.
Well, not how it makes them feel. That's usually what people can answer very easily. It's what do you get out of it? It's kind of the 2-year-old's question, like, okay, so you hired the lawyer and he won. Why does it matter?
Right.
Now, at first, people will be like, well, this is kind of a moron. It's just like, but if they sit and think, if you push them to think about it, they will then go where I'm telling you want to take them. And that is, oh, well, here's why I needed the lawyer. I needed the lawyer because to my business.
Right.
And that, Mitch, is where like you would find the patterns in your customers that will create killer marketing copy. Because I guarantee you there's one or two of those that everybody's going to talk about in their interview. And that is the magic, but it's not conscious, Mitch. See, this is the thing. What's conscious is, I like Mitch. He's a nice guy.
Right. I feel happy. You got to find out. Right?
Yeah, they got to go deeper than I can go.
They don't realize.
Now, Mitch winning the case for me does this.
Right.
So that is really what you want to figure out. And that actually takes some research and some listening, because people aren't consciously thinking about that. It's unconscious.
So that affects what? My marketing decision, the messages I put out, the content that I make available.
Those outcomes, because they're connected to emotions and emotional language, those outcomes, when you can figure out what they are and describe them well, you get really good marketing copy that will tap into that unconscious perception of the value of your product or service. That's where marketing works, is when it can figure out how to connect to that layer of unconscious understanding of the value of what you're doing. Because that 99% of our behavior is unconscious.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, so that's where you actually hook people. You hook people based on their unconscious behavior patterns that they associate with certain domains. And which domain you're going to hook them to has to do with the product or service that you offer. Now, I'm in food and beverage, so I have a lot of, it usually comes down to certain kinds of eating occasion, and how that intersects with the consumer's lifestyle. That creates an outcome set right? So they're looking for certain outcomes when they have a morning snack, and they're a type A busy professional who, works 13 hours a day. I'm just making this up, right? So that kind of person has a different need in their diet. They have different dietary needs. They have different outcomes. So maybe their morning snack is, I need something that I don't have time to eat. I need to have a snack that will actually potentially allow me to skip lunch, because I have a lot of lunchtime calls.
Get me through.
I'm just making something. So this is literally how nuanced it gets. And if you don't listen and talk to your consumers, you're never going to figure this out, because they're not just going to offer it up.
Right. Well, obviously in the food and beverage industry, we're talking about a, large industry, and all the way down to the consumer. And it's you're looking for what these things are.
And the problem is that in like food and beverage, personal care, and those kinds of things, the usage is so unconscious.
Right, because we're just all in, what's the word? We're all in automatic mode.
Absolutely, right? Because we're saving our cognitive time for things like talking to my lawyer.
Yeah, no, we don't want to be consciously making all those decisions. We'll go nuts.
You can't. You go insane. So
can't survive.
That's why you have to do, like in my area, it's really important that you get there and you push and fight to get there in the consumer's mind. And it's not that easy. And they'll often give you false narratives of why they do things. In my industry, it's really bad. They'll actually tell you BS.
Yeah, so it's hard to, you got to weed through.
And so you actually have to approach it like almost like a criminal investigator, which is that they're not actually going to be truthful.
Right.
Because they themselves don't fully understand their own behavior and why they pick things. And that's
why they're attached to something.
I think it's the disconnect between why I'm hiring the lawyer. Like, I think people tend to understand why they're hiring a lawyer, because it's very expensive and they think about it a lot, and it's very
something going on. They have some problem in their life. They got to.
It doesn't mean that you couldn't do research to figure out like the tagline for your legal business that would really help focus you and bring you a certain kind of customer who because of your research will become a repeat customer. If you can say, look, I'm offering solutions that will generate this outcome for you. Right. And most other attorneys locally won't do it, or no other attorney will do it. So, I mean, this. I mean, you look at the way that local attorneys hyper specialized now. So you get like injury attorneys, you got all these other things. So people are finding their outcome domains already naturally. But the key is you've got to figure out that language which will separate you. And honestly, since nobody does what I'm talking about in professional services, very rarely do they do it locally.
Right. It's easier to stand out. Right.
Yeah. If you do it at all, you're going to stand out. I mean, if you have a tagline, you're going to stand out.
Right.
So it's just like,
right.
And the tagline, it doesn't cause someone to hire you. It causes someone to remember you. It's about memory. It's just about standing out and memorability. And the memorability is something that you can bank on to get them on an email list. And then you're in a conversation, and then you're pushing them through a marketing funnel. And 5% will become your clients, or 10% will become your clients every year.
Right. Yeah. I think people don't, especially in the service business, my business, they don't understand the power of funnels. You have to kind of bring somebody into your world and work them through whatever.
The odd thing about legal degrees, it's expensive, but it leads to often a highly transactional client base. And I think the worst thing you can do is have a legal practice based on pure, literally like bus stop hit and run transactionalism. What you want is that, even if you're an injury attorney, you don't want that. So, because you want people to have already heard of you long before the accident.
Of course, because then you're always fighting for new business. There's no stability in your work.
And guess who you
we all have that problem.
You have low trust shit clients.
Right. Clients. You do. You don't have any sticky relationships with people. So that's why, as a business owner, I like to work with like family-owned businesses and business with multiple partners, because I work with them long-term, not just one transaction.
Yeah. So the old way of doing this is what you're referring to, is kind of the bingo parlor, and law, so the veteran, the VA bingo hall kind of networking for your clients, right? Where you actually literally spend your time building a relationship. And that's fine. People can do that. And I think it can work, but you'll never scale. Right. Never in a million years. And the more specialized like you are as a product or service, it won't work, because there aren't enough people through word of mouth for your clients to tell in their own social networks for highly specialized and niche things, right? So it's much better to that's where marketing can help get you to that next rung of growth, because what it does is it uses the learnings of the satisfied customers, and then it delivers the symbolism and the language that then can go find those other people,
right,
and bring them into a communications relationship. So instead of the old sort of greasing the palms kind of relationship building that could lead to like a high referral local business is kind of fading away, because the referrals don't come as easily because the networks are all broken up now. So local social networks are not as tight.
Right.
They're too diverse. The old boys network is gone. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
Right? So that's gone.
Well, because you and I can work with people outside of our.
Well, no, because
it's much easier to do that now.
There aren't any. The old boys are just a bunch of white Anglo-Saxon guys historically.
And they're old.
The point, you can't limit yourself to that anymore if you want to have any business. I mean, it makes sense.
Right.
So you've got to be able to deal with a diverse client audience. Well, then how are you going to do that? Well, you can't do it based on ethnic ties and gendered stupid stuff. You've got to do it based on, how do I deliver the outcome? And because that's the thing that will bring everybody together.
Right.
So if you want to actually scale fast and have the people come to you, then you can create a relationship. That's why digital marketing is great. You create a funnel, you create a communications system where people who are thinking about your service, like, I may need an estate attorney sometime.
Right. But they
go to your site,
more top of mind, right? Is that basically what it's
exactly
doing?
So you get into, you give gifts.
Right. Information. Pretty much.
You create a relationship that's digital. It's weak, but it's a lot stronger than your competitor. He's doing nothing.
Right. Well, then nobody's doing it. True, right?
So he's just a guy with a phone number.
Right.
And he's just going to attract basically idiots, because people who wait to the last minute, who are dumb, who didn't plan ahead. I mean, there is such a thing as a horrible client. I mean, it's just.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, I have a couple of colleagues that just troll the internet for basically low end fruit. And the only way they stay in business is just by bringing in huge volumes of people, because they don't have any relationships that are sticking. And that they just go one off to the next, and that closing ratio is very low.
That's been used in real estate too by people.
Yeah.
But it's
I guess for some people that works.
It's a bottom feeder strategy, man.
Yeah.
So if you have thick skin and are used to like a 95% rejection ratio and working for crazy people, then go for it. But I think most people,
but that doesn't improve your quality of life. Doesn't make it fun to work. It doesn't,
and they generally
terrible way to do business.
Those volume oriented services, John, actually make money. That's my understanding.
They eventually peter out.
The guys,
too much of a race.
The guys who make money and develop a national practice, they are premium providers.
Yeah.
And the only way you do that is you can build a reputation, you can develop a marketing relationship with people where the right customers will spread your name in their social networks. But I think that one way to seed word of mouth, is Mitchell, is marketing. Because so if you look at my background, I'm an expert in sort of storytelling and what the stories say or don't say about other behavior in the person's life. And marketing is the same thing. It's like, how do I tell a story that compels trial?
Of course.
Or at least makes them consider me or makes them remember me as a great option. It's all storytelling, right? So if you can create a story that's actually the story that people told you in the interview, this is where I laugh, because like, it's so obvious. Why haven't people been doing it? You basically
just mirroring. I think about branding called Your Story Brand or something.
Yeah, you're mirroring back the story that was shared across the interviews about what the valuable outcome was of working with you. You learn how to write that really well. That's the marketing professional's job. Get it really short, and then you basically find all these ways to transfer that story.
Right. Now, can I ask you a question? So I understand branding from a large corporate, standpoint, but because you're using the word marketing, and maybe they're interchangeable at the lower level. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a solo practitioner, like 80% of the legal profession is, you're a small business owner. How does branding impact you, and how is it different than marketing? Or maybe it's not. I don't know.
So the professional service provider has one complication, which is that, and working alone doesn't prevent you from branding at all. But you have to make a decision whether you want to have what is your brand identity, is the technical term. Is it your name?
might be you, right? Yeah.
Is it your name, or are you going to create a company shell trademark, is what they call it, a trademark that will then be the brand that you're pushing? Now, in my case, my name is so boring, so sleep inducing and common that I can't own the SEO. I'll never own page one.
Right. It's too
on
much.
Google.
It's too common.
Because well, there's a radio celebrity in Europe who basically owns it. So there's just no way.
Got it. So
there's
he
no
comes
way.
up.
Yeah, there's nothing I could do. I would have to kill him. So,
I'm the other end of the spectrum. There's
like,
no other Mitchell Vine hacker on the planet that I'm aware of. There are other Vine hackers, and I don't think that's Mitchell Vine.
You're set. So that's a decision you have to make. It's a big one. It feels big, but it's actually super tactical. It doesn't really matter, is my point. It could be your name.
If you're a solopreneur, does it really matter if you have a trademark? I mean,
no, it's much better that it would be your name. I couldn't do that. I invented an acronym because acronyms are common in consulting. PGS, it does have a meaning. As a student of branding, though, I know the power of having a what's called a meaningless trademark, and mine's totally meaningless because it's just 3 letters. Like, it's not a word.
It's an association, right?
Right. And so what happens is that when you have a meaningless symbol that doesn't have a clear, like, immediate denotative meaning like a word does, when you do this, what happens is over the long term, it starts to accrete power and meaning collectively in your audience's mind. That's all about you.
Right. Got to all be about you.
Years.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
It takes years for that meaning. It's like an empty vessel. It takes years for the meaning to fill in and become socially shared, but it will happen.
Right.
It will happen in a focused and powerful way if you are very consistent.
Consistency, I've learned. Yeah, it's the key.
So your behavior out in public with the consumer, with your audience, and also in all your marketing touch points, if you're ruthlessly consistent, people will develop a coherent set of associations, and then you actually develop a brand. Yeah. Now that could be your personal. Sense. It could be your personal name too. Right?
Yeah, it's so still right. You're personally branded,
but it'll have these meanings because you went out. Your blog posts all fit within a certain tone or top. They're all written the same way. They all have a certain topical focus. People will unconsciously absorb all that. So like in my industry, I made a decision with some initial research and playing around with potential clients early on. No idea what I was doing, because I was a consultant for big companies inside a consulting firm. I never had to sell myself alone.
Right.
And now I'm working for startups, a totally different audience, with less money. So I was all over the place trying to, do I work with investors? Do I work with the startups? What do I do? So I eventually found out that there's a problem. This is why you do research. There's a problem with my audience. And the problem is they don't trust their investors.
Oh, interesting.
And their investors are mostly douchebags.
Oh, that's good to know. You're talking about like startups and things like that?
Yeah. They're bullies.
Right.
They're entitled men who have no accountability. They work in investment banks full of other men.
Still to this day,
it's the last. Finance and banking is the last zone of the old boys world that's left. So so there's a horrendous amount of bad behavior and bad actors. And so at first I was skeptical because I figured, well, there must just be 2 whiners I met. But then I just kept hearing it everywhere. And I'm like, okay, so there's something going on here. And then I'm like, oh, I get it. I'm going to be the founder's ally. I am going to be the only guy in the United States who is actually only interested in the founder, has no other third-party bias, conflict of interest or anything.
Okay.
And I am the only one.
Yeah.
Everybody else is in bed with some stakeholder. I mean, I won't go into all the details, but my industry is very, very corrupt. So the entire game is stacked against the entrepreneur in consumer brands. I mean, everybody is trying to exploit you. The retailer, the distributor, everybody's trying to exploit you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of corruption. There's a lot of bad actors. There's a lot of dishonesty. Although my standard for honesty is very high because I have Asperger's. I just can't.
Right, so we'll give them a little bit of leeway, but still.
Yeah, I have 0 tolerance. But I think my brand is about, I'm looking out for you. And I literally, all my media channels pull back the curtain on all the bullshit, the lying, the corruption, and the crap.
Right.
And I have a lot of enemies because they don't like that I'm doing this.
Why? Lifting the curtain up so people can do things the right way and be more successful?
No, I want them to actually succeed.
Really...
And so I'm screwing over the incumbent players by revealing the dirty secrets of the industry is what I'm doing. But people love it.
Of course. Of course. All venture capital deals, they're all, I used to call them death spirals. They're like, as soon as you do something wrong, they start taking apart your company. They want all their money back or whatever. It's just,
it's a very Jekyll and the Hyde dance, which is that, it's all sweet talk and cocktails. And then 5 years in, you do the slightest thing wrong, and they're basically trying to decapitate you.
Right. Just on that marriage license, and they not don't dating anymore,
But it's pretty sociopathic behavior, to be honest.
Yeah, well, I guess maybe it's like the chicken and the egg, right? It's like the industry that attracts those kind of people, You
definitely have to have a stomach for dealing with those kinds of people.
Right.
And some people can handle it fine. Like I just would strangle them. So that wouldn't end well. But but I don't do it. But I don't get involved in that game.
You figure them out, and people don't know what's going on. I've looked at a lot of deals. I'm like, you don't want to do this. This is bad.
Yeah. But I think that, so I'm the ally, but my expertise is in exponential growth. So I wrote the book, Ramping Your Brand. That's all about, I deconstructed what Kind Bar, Vita Coco, Skinny Pop, and 100 other brands did to grow exponentially and get to scale. And I wrote a book about it, and no one else had done that research. So I put it out there as a gift for founders. I don't care if investors use it. That's great. But I made it clear that the book was written for founders first, investors and other people second, who are sort of looking over the founder's shoulder. What are you reading? But it's working. It's bringing me the right highly ambitious clients.
Right.
They may or may not have investors. I don't really care.
Right. There's still founders that don't necessarily.
But they're coming to me because once they make it, they're actually, this is the thing with investors, is they try to control the advisors that you work with. I mean, they can't legally prevent you from hiring me. There's no way they can stop that from happening.
Right.
But they can try to do a smoker's mirrors, try to, you should, no. I don't know who he is. You should talk to this guy. And who's this guy? It's the guy who's
in my pocket,
who's co-investing in my portfolio and he's on my fucking team and is just going to do what I tell him to say.
Like when you buy a house, do you take all of the advisors from the realtor and
do you get the realtor's home inspector?
No, I got a couple of those going on. Bad results because they're serving a different master.
Yeah, the home inspector who the realtor suggested to you is designed to close the realtor's sale.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, they won't find anything.
No, it happens a lot, unfortunately. Because they want to get referred again.
Yeah, exactly.
Human nature.
They're called the associate sales manager. Those inspectors.
Yeah. Now, you're working with a lot of founders. Are they startups? Are they more developed companies? I know they're mostly in food and beverage, or they're all over.
I don't. So in every industry, this word startup refers to like a different revenue range, I'm finding.
Yeah, of course.
In my world, it's basically startup means like less than $1 million. I don't actually work with a lot of those companies. I work with, on a limited basis, I work with female minority startups because they're so screwed by this corrupt white man industry that I feel someone's got to help. But I generally don't work with startups. I work with 7-8 figure fast growing.
They're revenue generating operating businesses, but you're working with the founders who founded the business.
They hired me. Yeah, exactly. They've hired me. They may or may not have investors. Sometimes they clear me with the investors. Usually they do. And like I said, the investor can't block it. All they can do is complain.
Well, why would they complain? You're helping the founder basically to move to the next level and ramp up their brand and scale their company. Why would they be against that?
Because we live in America, Mitch, and my book is about patience.
I see. And they don't like that. They're not patient.
I've never met an investor who really wants to wait 7 to 10 years in the United States.
Right. 3 to 5 is probably pushing it, right?
2 to 3 is more like it.
Yeah. They want to get out.
The reality is in my industry, what they've done, rather than waste their time with a bunch of goofball startup bets, which never go anywhere because the company flames out. They're waiting till they're 10 and 20 million because they know they have enough knowledge to know, if they're 10 or 20 million and they double every year or like become a unicorn, then I'll get my return in 3.
Right.
So it's all greed. It's all impatience. That's how most investors.
It's
That's how
Capitalism.
most investors think. In Europe, they
Yeah.
have a totally different investing approach.
Right.
And I always tell people, man, if you can get your money from Europe, do it.
Yeah. They have a different
Yeah.
societal
Not only are
paradigm.
they smarter, they're smarter
yeah.
investors. They're more disciplined, they're more analytical, and they're more patient. So the reality is that my book is about a 7 to 10 year process. And I know it works. And it's actually the most reliable path to scale for food, beverage, and personal care, despite all the crap you read in entrepreneur magazines. So the reality is, when you look at data as opposed to anecdotes, the path becomes a lot clearer. And so I wrote the book to help people, because in part, the investors are actually pitching the opposite. And it's a bullshit house of cards in which they themselves don't risk a lot of money. I mean, yes, they might be a 7-figure check, but on a $400 million fund, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, they're just burning, but they're burning through business after business after business till they hit the unicorn.
Correct. They are American venture capitalists specifically they only need to have a 10 to 15% win rate on their investments. So most of their investments going in, they're very cynical and don't necessarily know.
Right. They figure 1 to 2 out of 10.
Yeah.
Are going to
so it's that cynical
sort of return.
And that, but it doesn't mean that they won't annoy you.
Well, no, because it's still money. They still put their money in your company.
But so I think the challenge is that I get hired by these guys. Sometimes there's a minority investor. I don't mean that racially. I just mean like one person or two people.
Right.
We'll have a problem with the business and how it's run, and they like my book, and they've mentioned it, and then the founder looked at it and like, yeah, this is interesting. But often the founder's just coming to and they like the fact that I'm a founder ally and I focus on this patient exponential growth. And I mean, the book is for ambitious people, but it's not like stupid shit. And it definitely, I can just tell you, man, if you've got institutional investment, even in consumer startups, it's very unlikely that half your board or more. I mean, it's very likely that half your board or more doesn't have the patience for the model in my book. It still blows my mind. It's like, it's just, I see it everywhere. It's crazy. It's out of control.
Right. It's like the lotto mentality. They want to hit the lottery.
Yeah. And the reality is the brands that scale and make a lot of money for everybody because of the valuation, but also the EBITDA, like the profitability, they're financially, here's a news. They're financially efficient businesses, Mitch. They create a lot of money and profit off the sales for the expenses per consumer, per household going in. And the way you do that is you build a repeat purchase driven, heavy user driven business. You build a business on gonzo fans, right? Like my friends at Spindrift.
You're building a stable business. You're building a deep relationship.
So like my friends at Spindrift,
but
the brands that are doing this, they have very low household penetration by the time they get to 9 figures and people start shopping them, to big companies. They could be 2% of households in the US. They're tiny. I mean, most of the country has no idea they exist.
Right. Well, it's still a small company.
Yeah. And then there's other people. But the model that's being peddled continuously is just spray everything out at Walmart, go boom, 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 just chase as many purchases as you can. And I know for a fact, because I've looked at the data, that model tends to fail more often than not.
Yeah.
And people just don't want to believe it because they just want to rush. And the one thing you can control, if you have a lot of money, you can just open up retail doors. You just write checks, you pay slotting fees, and you can just get your shit
on shelves. Yeah.
And so if you're really hasty and rich, this is the temptation. And so people
with hasty, you're probably not rich. That was probably the problem. Nobody builds a solid foundation.
The problem, no, that's not really true though, Mitch.
No?
I mean, the reality is on Wall Street, that's the problem. Is
stupid people make money. Yeah.
The Wall Street LPs who fund these venture capital funds, they actually can make $100 million in 2 years. That's how banking can work if you're good at it.
Yeah.
So that's the problem. And
you can crush a lot of people in the process, and who cares?
Yeah. Well, but making money on top of money is a different skill set, and it's a hell of a lot easier. Trying to convince people to remember your soft drink and then go buy it by the case That's a much more challenging thing.
Yeah, no, I understand. Look, I always said, if you had $1 million business, to go from 1 million to 2 million is much harder than to go from 30 million to 60 million.
Yeah.
Because it's a totally different scaling business. So let me ask you a question, because you were giving really good advice for the solopreneur, the small business owner, as to how to, get to know your customers and figure out what it is they really want, what your messaging should be. Other parting advice, because I know I've taken up a lot of your time. The day's starting for you now in Arizona. So
yeah, I would say, whether it's you or an assistant, it just needs to be somebody who listens. Call up 8 to 10 of your most valuable profit generating clients, the people who keep coming back.
Right.
And this is so in other words, your fans.
Yeah.
And then ask a series of questions that are completely open-ended. So an open-ended question it's a how question, a why, a what.
Right. Not that it requires a yes or a no, because then they won't tell you anything.
Well, they will, but it'll be yes.
Right. People don't realize that.
That's yeah. So, and I mean, if you really committed to this, I actually have a course on my website, which will help anybody really. I mean, I wrote it for my industry, but there's some principles in the training that would help you understand what I'm talking about in detail. If you want to go to Premium Growth Solutions, check that out.
Yep.
And you can ignore the stuff that's about packaged goods, but most of it is about, this course is about how to do like interviews and how to do a survey that's very quick about, what are the key outcomes that my fans associate with my services or my products. And it'll teach you how to do this. It's not it'll take time, but it's actually not expensive to do this.
Right.
Right. And I think if you have an email list, because you have an established business, that you could really fine tune your marketing to get to the next level. Because what you want is, that outcome. I often find that a great tagline that resonates with human beings, because all it is language, right?
Right.
Is an outcome tagline. And I talk a lot about Red Bull. And they have one of the most successful taglines in a way, because it literally, and haven't changed it since they launched in the United States.
That's it gives you wings.
Yeah. Everybody knows about it. Everybody knows it, but it's an outcome. It's a playful outcome.
Right.
Right. And because it's an energy drink, right?
It says what it means, right?
Yeah. So that's a really concrete example of what I'm talking about. And you need to, if you can find the one-liner for you, and you can just repeat it everywhere and make it fun, this is how you stay on top of mind. So that's the value of the research, is being top of mind in your circle of professional providers in your local area or nationally, and just standing out and sticking out.
Right.
That's huge, because there's a lot of
That's the
service
key.
providers.
If you can figure that out, then all your marketing will be on point. And a lot of people put stuff out and it's not on point.
The final thing I would say is, aside from getting the marketing language right, which is worth spending time on, is this notion of just the fact that you go out and behave like a major professionally run brand.
Yeah.
That will make you stand out.
Yeah. And there's ways to do that without being a big
corporation. I can't tell you the number of people who are amazed at my website, which does follow a lot. A lot of thought went into it, blah, 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 blah. But the principles behind it are mind-numbingly simple. It's that 90% of people don't execute them.
Right. Yeah. It's not that they can't do it. It's that they don't.
They don't. So they look like amateurs.
Yeah. And you don't have to. You can look like a professional.
Yeah. We do judge on those surface layers at the beginning, because why? We live in a society of strangers. We've got to quickly filter through the bozos. So one way you do it is, that guy looks like he's on drugs and homeless, right? Because the hair's all messed up, and the shirt's covered in dirt.
So what else? What other conclusion are you going to draw? That's the only conclusion.
Right. Whereas if you're Jeff Bridges and you're a Hollywood celebrity, you can dress like a drug addicted homeless person, and everyone will still love you. But that's different. But that's different, because you already built a brand.
Right. Exactly. No, you did.
But if you want to stand out, then you got to look like you're totally put together, and that will. So I know a lot of people who are professionals like you, they look at marketing like, this is so superficial, such a waste of my time. And the reality is, no, it's no different than you fussing about what you're wearing at a client meeting. It's the same thing.
Right.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It really is. So you should take care. I mean, you take care about how you dress when you meet a client, then your website should have the same level of detail and care.
Yeah, makes sense, right?
Right.
Wear a suit, look good online. And it's not so expensive either. It's not like some
not
costly
anymore,
endeavor.
no.
Not anymore.
No, in the 90s, it used to cost you a ton.
Yeah.
To get a
now there's all these tools out there to do things. Yeah, I agree. Well, James, I can't thank you enough for agreeing to jump on with me. Yeah. We'll put links in the show notes to your book, to your website. And you also have don't you host a podcast too on branding?
It's more about how to grow a consumer brand. So it's called Startup Confidential.
Okay.
And it's really my big trust building media channel for the people who are interested in working with me down the line. So
got it. So they could find you on Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify.
It might be a little industry specific for you, but there are some episodes that are more generalizable, like on advertising, how to think about it, and stuff like that. But mostly that's my channel where I pull back the curtain on the screwed up industry.
Oh, nice. Okay. And also, you also gave us a link, which we're going to put in the show notes, to a special landing page for my listeners, right? Where they can get a free chapter of the book and some other information.
That's correct. If you guys, as you're listening to this, for the next day or two, my book will be discounted. You can find the link on the landing page, and there's also a free excerpt that you can read.
Okay, great. All right. Well, James, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate you coming on, and enjoy the holiday weekend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Mitch.